Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my spoiler review for Avatar The Last Airbender, Katara, and the Pirate Silver. So I did a non-spoiler review yesterday where I talked more generally about the book and didn't go into too many specifics. Talked about as much as I could without just giving away every exact detail that happened. Here, we're going to be much more focused on the specifics of the plot, what happens, reading out some quotes and stuff like that. So this is more of a kind of almost like scene by scene, more analysis type thing. But for the, I suppose, the full scene by scene discussion, more ordered, we're going to be doing that on the podcast, which hopefully will be this weekend. I still have to organize it, but it'll either be this weekend or next weekend. Myself and Greg will be going through this book in full, in detail, our usual page-by-page analysis. I'm not going to quite go as in-depth here. I'm going to sort of order it a little bit differently, but still cover most of the same points. So, if you missed the video yesterday, my general thoughts on the book were that ultimately it's still like a high-quality comic. Art is incredible. Faith Erin Hicks knows how to write the characters in character, and it's a fun story, primarily focused on Katara, but also with a somewhat interesting side plot with Aang talking to a Fire Nation soldier. The problem is that there, in the grand scheme of things, really isn't a lot of depth to it, and setting the book where they set it, in the middle of book 2, immediately limits what you can and can't do as part of this story, and I do think the book ultimately really suffers from that. I think this book should have been set during the comic timeline rather than during ATLA, and I think they really locked themselves into a story that was always going to be limited in scope by doing it this way. It's still fun. I'd still ultimately recommend you guys pick it up just because we haven't had a lot of new Avatar content this year, and you know, why wouldn't you get the only Avatar book released this year? So, you know, not the highest recommendation in terms of like get it because by default it's the only new Avatar book, but that's kind of where we're at right now. So it ultimately is a relatively middle-of-the-road book. For what it is, it accomplishes most of what it needed to do, but I don't think it's being... I think you have to be fair and say that, you know, it's not enough to just, I suppose, dismiss a lot of criticism with this by just saying that, oh, it's a one-shot, so you can't expect it to do more than basically what it did. That, to me, is being far, far too kind to the book. I think there's room with these one-shots, with like 72 pages, to do quite a lot. Reading this, you know, the first proper one-shot that's this length, there's enough page count to cover quite a bit, and I don't think they use it as effectively as they should. So there's just a quick sort of intro, there are my thoughts, and let's get into the specifics. So we'll start with just the premise of the book, which I talked a little bit about yesterday, and it's basically that we start off in the air. We're basically set straight after 209 Bitter Work, just before the library. So Toph is still relatively new to the group, and the main issue within the group is really Katara and Toph's dynamic, that they both have very different personalities, and that's what we sort of get to discussing here, that they both have different approaches. Toph is more tough, direct, and blunt, and Katara is more kind, caring, and will do things with positive reinforcement. The problem comes when they try to directly get into what is going to be the, you know, the need for Katara to prove herself to Toph, to prove to Toph that I can be tough too. The reason that happens is where we get into what feels like a rather blatant continuity error, which I think they just about get away with because there is some vagueness in the way it is written. I don't think it's great that you have to rely on interpreting it a specific way. It should be much clearer than it actually is, and they leave it open to quite a bit of criticism. And there's a few points in the book where they do this. They have stuff where this is basically a continuity error, and you just have to sort of be like, okay, book, I don't want to accuse you of just directly getting the continuity wrong here, but you basically have, but I suppose I'll let you away with it because you kind of worded it open-endedly. And the first one of them is right at the start of the book. Aang still learned both earth and water bending. The only real difference is when I taught him he learned earth bending in a day, it took him, a couple of weeks to learn water bending. I'm like, what? Like, it feels wrong on both counts. Did Aang learn earth bending in a day? No. Did he learn water bending in weeks? No. But it depends on what way you are viewing learning a full bending discipline. In that Toph is basically implying here that what we saw on screen in Bitter Work, which resulted in Aang doing one move of actual earth bending, having not been able to bend earth at all that entire episode, she is treating that as Aang is now able to earth bend full stop, even though we only see him do one move. Versus she is saying Katara took weeks to get Aang water bending, even though, as far as we're aware, back in 108, she taught him the moves that she knew. She was a novice at the time, of course, and he learned them straight away, instantaneously, to the point where he was adapting to Katara's moves quicker than she was. I don't know how you can interpret this scene as being like 100% like accurate. I get Toph is trying to brag a little bit about her approach is better. Being tough, it means you can learn things quicker. But in this exact situation, you can't say that because Aang ultimately adapted and learned waterbending much quicker than he learned earthbending. And the only way to really give this book the credit here is to say that, well, I guess he did quite a bit of training before he eventually had to, do the earthbending, so he ended up with a decent foundation straight away, versus Katara just taught him the few moves that she knew. But the difference again is that he was incorporating those new waterbending moves into his style straight away in combat situations. He wasn't fighting in combat at the end of this book, in Bitter Work, basically, with his earthbending. So I'll roughly let the book away with it, but that is not a particularly well written line, given that it is ultimately the thing that sets his plot into motion. Katara is like, what? I can't believe this. Like, Aang, I wasn't as soft as a Croco kitten when I thought you waterbending, was I? I was a good teacher. And he's like, yeah, you were, but you have different approaches. It's okay to not be as tough as Toph. And she's just kind of like, so why does it feel like it's not okay? She interprets the rest of the group's reaction to this as being like it's a problem that she is not as tough, direct as Toph, and that they wish she was more like that, and that her caring side maybe doesn't help her. The problem is that, as far as we're aware, Katara was Aang's best teacher, who he learned from. She had the exact style that Aang needed. So it kind of feels weird that this is overly bigging up the way Toph teaches Aang, which again is fine. He learns from her very well, but it's not placing as much of an importance on the fact that Toph needed to adapt her teaching a little bit by using the positive reinforcement. They address it here, but they ultimately dismiss it. They're like, there was a little bit of that, but there was more rock choking, and it's like, so you admit that you had to take some of Katara's approach to teach Aang. I get it's Toph bragging, but it's not great that straight away we're in this, in the middle of book 2, and you're already coming up against more errors than you need to. But yeah, this is where the physically, I suppose, the plot kicks off. Straight after that, fire catapult comes at them. Aang has to dodge with Appa. Katara obviously was just kind of a little bit upset and was talking to the group. She can't hold on to anything in time, so she ends up falling off Appa as they have to dodge. She falls into the water, and this is what separates her from the group. She ends up basically really going down off like a waterfall and stuff like that. She protects herself with ice and so on. This is why she completely gets out of the view of the rest of the group, so the group have to sort of land, find a base of operations and sort of search for her from there. And this is why she can't immediately make her way back to the group. She is fully separated. And yeah, moments like that are what this book does actually quite well. there is a lot of moments where you get to see her really showcase how strong of a waterbender that she actually is. Like, she falls into rushing waters and could have been killed here bashing up against these rocks, but protects herself really well with the ice ball here. And then similarly later on in the book, she is just borderline this unstoppable force sort of out in the waters against these random Fire Nation soldiers. But we'll stop here to pretty much cover most of the Aang and the Fire Nation soldier plot, which I suppose Sokka is more involved with as well. Not so much Toph. So they stop basically next to where the catapults were, where the attack came from that separated Katara from them. And they find this one random Fire Nation soldier out sort of eating his lunch off to the sides. To stop him from alerting everyone, they basically capture him. Toph immediately deals with him. And so they pretty much have a prisoner in this Fire Nation soldier. And they begin to talk to him as they figure out what to do. And Aang sort of stops the search for Katara because he wants to talk to this Fire Nation soldier and figure out why is he saying all these blatantly wrong things, lies about the air nomads. And it all comes from this. We'll never stop until the world is safe from your malice, Avatar. And Aang's like, wait, malice? What? Why are you thinking that I've done anything? You know what you did. You and the air nomads, you were plotting to take over the world. That's why the Fire Nation had to stop you. That's what the Fire Nation believe. That's why they're fighting. Why they seem to, be okay with the fact that there are no airbenders in the world. That's what the Fire Nation believes. So Aang realizes he needs to stop and try and convince this guy that that is wrong. Tell him the truth, and the others are ultimately like, yeah, Katara can look after herself. Aang, we understand why you need to take a stand against this Fire Nation soldier. So basically, he just is like, I want to try and change his mind. And he says, the Fire Lord wasn't content with wiping out the air nomads. He also spread lies that we had a secret army, that we were a threat to the entire world. I can't believe these people think these lies are the truth, but they do. He does. I have to, change his mind, tell him he's wrong. Even if I only change one mind in the Fire Nation, isn't that worth doing? And that is correct. And again, this is where you again brush up against the idea of is this not basically a continuity error? How does Aang here, before 302, the headband, know that the Fire Nation have spread lies that the air nomads had a military, had an army, basically? You look at the scene from the headband when he's in the school, and the teacher, as if it's fact, asks the question, when did the Fire Nation battle the air nomad army so-and-so? And Aang is like, is that a trick question? The air nomads didn't have a formal military. If he already knew that they felt that way, he wouldn't have answered the question in that way. Which, to me, my interpretation from that scene is definitely that is news to him. He, in that episode, learns that that is what they are taught at school. That is what the Fire Nation thinks. So I think it is kind of a continuity error that Aang knows back here, like a whole season beforehand, that apparently they had a secret army. And is it a terrible continuity error? Not really, but it kind of is. There's no, I think, other way to really view it other than that it is. And you have to jump through a few hoops to make it okay. Because that's what happened in the episode. Why was that not considered when this scene was being written? And so the question from here is okay, what is the Fire Nation guy going to actually say? Are they going to make this continuity error worse, or what? What's going on here? But yeah, the rest of the group basically at this point realized that Katara is going to be okay. They compared her to a croco kitten before because she's kind and cuddly and sort of like that. But Sokka says they're pretty helpless at the beginning, but once their scales come in, they could take down a fully grown platypus bear. So just presenting this idea that yes, Katara typically is kind and caring, but when she needs to fight for the people she cares about, she can become she has this other side to her that is very, very tough. And like this is like 30 pages in, less than halfway through, they're basically telling you that Katara doesn't really need to prove to the group that she's tough. They already know, but that's what's going to happen in the book anyway. So, this is most of where the Aang plot sort of happens. He goes up to the guy again. He has him like they have him planted in the ground in earth, and he's like, "Flamio, my good hot man. I know we've met under difficult circumstances, but that's no reason not to get to know each other." And he just blows a leaf off the guy's face, but the guy freaks out because he has been thought to view airbenders as all being incredibly dangerous. He only knows about their skill set from legend, and suddenly here's wind being blown in his face, and he freaks out and is like, "Get away from me with your demon air powers, Avatar." And he's like, "I won't hurt you, it's just airbending, it's a part of the balance of our world." And he says, "I know all about the dark abilities you airbenders had, how you could suck a man's breath out of his body, how you had an army of winged people ready to attack anyone who threatened you." And Aang just says, "The air nomads were peaceful monks, we never had an army, we don't even eat meat, and we can't fly, we can only glide with the help of gliders." So, interesting. I kind of do actually appreciate the reference from the soldier here to the idea of sucking air out of people's lungs, which is obviously a technique Afiko as well as Zahir use that we sort of know about. If Afiko was more doubled down on in canon, that would be a really cool connection, that the Fire Nation would actually know about this ability directly, because Afiko would have helped the Fire Nation in the past take out the air nomads, and they knew he had that technique, so that might be why it's gone down as legend. Aang obviously doesn't really react to this, which to me gives the impression that he likely knows that a move like that is possible with airbending, but because of the general philosophy and approach of airbenders, it is not a move any of them would typically do. So likely the master airbenders know they can do stuff like that, create suction around someone's mouth to suck air out of their lungs, like we obviously see happen. But this is how the Fire Nation go about sort of defaming the air nomads, making it seem like their destruction of the air nomads was justified because they had all these dark abilities and stuff like that. And it's interesting, like Aang pointing out that we can't fly, we can only glide with the help of gliders, which is a kind of interesting statement given that in the past, the original airbenders we saw from Beginnings could basically fly. They had this sort of flying nimbus, cloud surfing technique that seems to have been forgotten over time. And again, you have to consider that a lot of the benders back then were kind of just, they got the ability to go out, they gave it back when they came back in. So they likely weren't even particularly masters or high level benders. That was just back then considered a sort of standard airbending technique back then, but has been forgotten even by a master airbender like Aang all this time further in the future. So it is interesting to see the changes there, but they're not really talking about it. This is just me, adding a little bit extra on here. So yeah, this is where it kind of goes a little bit off track, where's your glider now, Avatar? And he's like, "Oh, it's with my flying bison." And the guy's just like, "Yeah, see, you have an animal that can fly." And you would have conquered the Fire Nation and every other nation from the backs of these flying animals, and so on. And Aang is just like, "What are you saying?" And this is sort of meant to be the point where you realize that, it's just sort of ingrained in them. They're indoctrinated to feel this way, and it's nothing Aang says is really going to change his mind. So Aang says, "Who told you that?" "My cousin, who got it from his sister, who got it from her roommate, who read it on a poster in some town out west." And Aang's just like, "Do you not think something you read on a poster might be untrue?" And he just says, "Why would the Fire Nation write untrue things on a poster? They cost a fortune to print." And Aang just leaves dejected and realizes he can't change the guy's mind, which is going to prompt Sokka to take a go at him. And really, that's the full extent of what I consider to be the sort of interesting part of this arc, was just that okay, we got that Aang has already figured out that he has heard from Fire Nation people that they think the air nomads had an army, and then from a random Fire Nation soldier's perspective, we find out how they view sort of the legend surrounding airbenders of sucking air out of people's lungs, that they can all just fly by default, and that they are, dangerous because they have flying animals, which I guess might link into the whole idea of, dragons being hunted. They're not really being dragons around anymore. Yet in the past, of course, the Fire Nation did, I suppose, have more dragons. So it is interesting that the fear of flying animals is also here. Let's get to this Sokka scene. So yeah, Sokka takes his go at this. So Aang trying to be really friendly and just demonstrate by, I'm an air nomad, I'll be friendly to you, isn't working. So Sokka's going to try and take him down with the facts, with logic. And I think this is pretty good. This is probably one of the most fun scenes in the whole book, because Sokka just goes full on at this guy. I'm going to take you down with logic. And the guy says, as long as you stand against the Fire Lord, you are my enemy. That's the thing. We don't want to be the Fire Lord's enemy. We'd actually love to live in harmony with him and the rest of the Fire Nation. For example, isn't it a bit odd that you're Fire Nation, but you've been sent to the Earth Kingdom to occupy it? And he's like, of course not. The Fire Nation is sharing its wealth and achievements with the rest of the world. The other nations should be honored that we're here. And Sokka says, think about that for a moment. Do Earth Kingdom citizens welcome you into their homes? Did they open the gates of Ba Sing Se to the Fire Nation armies? And he's like, well, no, not at first. And he's like, have you considered that maybe, just maybe, the rest of the world would also like to live in harmony with the Fire Nation, the way it did for centuries? But the Fire Lord would rather attack and dominate the world rather than live peacefully alongside the other nations. And the guy thinks about it for a second and is just like, no, and starts singing the, he actually does the sort of Fire Nation, oath. He does basically he sings the song Fire Nation Man sings, Fire Lord, my flame burns for thee. So it's just him being stubborn about, even though he's been confronted with a clear issue there of like, if the Fire Nation is doing this for all of these reasons, would the Earth Kingdom not be a little bit more accepting of what you're doing? Maybe you do just have to accept that you are the one conquering, but no, he can't view the Fire Nation in a bad way. And I think the problem with that, is we'll see this guy again. He breaks out, Appa grabs him, shoots him into the trees. So, it's just this guy getting thrown around by a lot of other characters. When Katara comes back into this side of the story, she'll also, ice him up and take him out. And that's really it. There's no resolution to this plot whatsoever. It's just Aang had an attempt to try and convince him, nothing happened. Sokka had an attempt to try and convince him, nothing happened. And that's it. There's just zero resolution to it. And sure, you can say it's somewhat realistic that, he didn't change, but it's also a case of, then why is this even here? We already knew from the headband that this is the way people feel. I can sort of get to a degree why you want to more present directly, like a soldier out there in the field presenting these views. But if you're going to do it, actually commit to doing something. Would there really have been a problem if Aang and Sokka had actually convinced this guy that what the Fire Nation was doing was wrong, and he actually began to question things? I get there's a sort of certain humor aspect to, Sokka presenting all this great evidence, Aang presenting the correct ways that the air nomads are, and the guy still being like, no, I love the Fire Lord. But it would have been so much more interesting to do it in the other way. And I feel very similarly about what they do with, Jiang's plot in the main plot with Katara, which we'll get to. Let me just check that is, in fact, everything with the Fire Nation. Yeah, that guy gets taken out, and yeah, he really doesn't get any resolution. So let's go back and cover the Katara side of the story. So while Aang, Sokka, and Toph, I suppose, are dealing with this random Fire Nation soldier, Katara obviously washes downstream and comes across an Earth Kingdom town that is being occupied by the Fire Nation. She quickly takes out a Fire Nation guard and then gets herself a sort of Earth Kingdom disguise, but she was spotted using waterbending, taking out the Fire Nation soldier. So this is where Katara meets Jiang and her other, the rest of her pirate crew. So that is, you can see some of that here. there is Jiang right there. She's the pirate captain. And basically, they want Katara as a waterbender to help them on their mission, which is to basically bring some of their cargo upstream, because they want help against the Fire Nation. They want a waterbender so they can sort of fight at sea, basically. And they just get across how sort of threatening they were because of when they previously hired a guy who said he was a waterbender and turned out to not be one. They obviously put him in the area where the saber-toothed moose line was, which is a nice reference to the episode that we just went past, highlighting that we're still in that same general area. Of course, Sokka had a run-in with the saber-toothed moose line, and other people did as well. So this is where Katara needs to prove that she's tough. Once she realizes she's not just in with, someone who has a ship, but a pirate crew, she realizes that, okay, I need to prove how tough I am to kind of, control myself as part of this group. And she tries to act tough. And she does actually sort of say, like, how would Toph do it? And she acts a little bit like Toph, but then she actually ends up sort of, making the other guys feel a little bit afraid. So, she finds her own, way to be tough, which is just that when she is, challenged, she's strong enough at waterbending to take anyone out, basically. When they meet up with the rest of their group, basically the guy supplying them, whose name is Tu, there's a nice connection to the other pirates from 108 and so on, where the guy says, my cousin O sails on a ship not far from here, and he's basically like, I'm pretty sure he mentioned a waterbender who messed with him and stole from him. I think that's you. And Katara pretty much is forced to threaten him and be like, no, it definitely wasn't me. And O is obviously Barker O, who is the smoke bomb guy on the pirate captain's crew. Weird that the pirate captain is just pirate captain, but that his first mate, I suppose, basically is actually named. And here we meet his cousin just there. So that is a nice enough connection. Just, we know O's name. Here it is referenced. But yeah, they touch on a few things during the Katara side of the plot, which is basically that, wait, is the stuff that we have here taken from the Earth Kingdom army? Why are you, Earth Kingdom pirates, stealing from the Earth Kingdom army? Does that not prove how bad you are as people, that you're taking stuff away from the army? The point that's being made here is just that Katara initially, based on first impressions, is led to believe that these are pirates, they're no different than the pirates she met before, and so they have no morals, and the proof that they're stealing from the Earth Kingdom army highlights that they don't care about anything, that they'll, they won't steal from the Fire Nation, but they will steal from their own army. And ultimately, it's meant to just be this kind of twist towards the end of the book that actually, no, Jiang is actually a pretty good person. Yes, she is a pirate and has some stuff that she maybe isn't happy about that she did in the past, but with the war on, they ultimately are against the Fire Nation, but they also don't have the highest respect for the Earth Kingdom army, because the Earth Kingdom army mainly represents Ba Sing Se. It doesn't really exist to help out the small people of small towns like this on the coast and so on. So the reveal is ultimately that they're not stealing contraband basically from the Earth Kingdom or the Fire Nation to make money by selling. They're taking medical supplies from the Earth Kingdom army to give to a town that is suffering from sickness. And the pirate silver of the title isn't referring to a treasure chest filled with, silver pieces. It's that in payment for giving medicine to this town, all Jiang wants is some silver lily flowers which happen to be grown in this area. And that's it. That's the sort of twist on the title. That's what the pirate silver from the title of the book is about. It's basically a very kind of oddly, I suppose, tricky twist title that just is meant to be like, Katara thinks Jiang is your typical pirate who's just out to swindle people, but actually she has a heart, she helps these people, and has more to her than meets the eye. And like Jiang is a perfectly fine character. I don't think she's like amazing or anything like that. I think some of her backstory is a little simplified just because they get across that like she comes from, I suppose, a family basically of pirates is effectively what they say. And you know, she talks about, you know, I'm not ashamed of my upbringing, it made me strong, but they do fight off Fire Nation soldiers when they can. That's what they're ultimately about at this point. But that they also can see that the Earth Kingdom army, while yes, it is fighting to ultimately save them from the Fire Nation, it is only serving Ba Sing Se primarily. In the same way that the Fire Nation doesn't particularly care about its own smaller towns or islands, the Earth Kingdom suffers from the exact same problem. It only cares about the, you know, larger affairs of the Earth Kingdom. Some small town being attacked or occupied doesn't matter so long as the major towns, the villages, you know, are the ones that they look after. So this is where we get the sort of action section of the book, which, you know, Katara gets to be really, really impressive in this side of the book. Some really big water bending moves because there's so much water out here to play with. There's no benders of note that she's really going up against. For the most part, we don't really see the other pirates fight that much. Jiang seems to be able to do some decent hand-to-hand stuff, but, you know, does she do enough to maybe make me say that she's like right up there with one of the best fighters we've ever seen? Not really. So she's just solid. It's all about Katara doing some really, really impressive water bending, including kind of bending ice, and you know, manipulating the water, helping the ship move and stuff like that really, really well. Like you can see here, you know, another big, large-scale move, and just getting across just how skilled she actually is. It was worth it for the crew to bring Katara on because she helped so much. And again, when Katara finally meets up with the soldier that they had captured, she ices him up straight away as well. So just he takes even more punishment after escaping from Aang and co. But that's really about it. Yeah, the twist part of the story sort of comes here, where after a lot of the scuffle and they finally get out of the way of the Fire Nation, some boxes have been knocked over, and she notices that they're bringing medicine. She notes that this isn't contraband, it's medicine. I used to help my gran prepare these herbs all the time back at the Southern Water Tribe. And she is initially criticizing them. You're worse than I thought. You're going to make sick people pay for the medicine. How could you be so cruel? And Jiang, you know, before the reveal comes out, I'll make plenty of silver from what's in these crates. And again, the twist is that she's not going to ask for money, she's going to ask for flowers. And even then, it's pretty much just like one flower that she kind of gets, so it's not even like that they actually give her like a ton of flowers. It's just more of a symbolic thing of that she basically asks for a flower to represent all of the silver. That's really it. And yeah, this is when you get it right here. They arrive at the place to deliver the medicine. Little boy comes out. He's holding one of the flowers here, and you can see it's not even like that impressive of a flower. Like that's the thing here of like, yes, it's called a silver lily as we find out, but it's just a pretty normal looking flower. So there's just a few parts of the book where it just feels like you could have made at least the flower like feel somewhat important, like just establishing if there's anything, you know, particularly of note about it. And then this is the page where, you know, Katara realizes she was kind of wrong about Jiang, but yeah. They make a few references to just Katara's, you know, whole idea of like, you know, stealing is okay except when if it's from pirates, that sort of thing. And yeah, these are my Earth Kingdom people. What sort of person would I be if I demanded money? They didn't. The money they didn't have as payment for curing their sick. And the line for Katara is, "You'd be a pirate if you did that." And it's just highlighting that, you know, pirates come in different forms and stuff like that. She says, and I was. For many years, I sailed the rivers, took what I wanted, sold it for profit. But that was before the Fire Nation invaded. I may be a criminal, but I'm still Earth Kingdom, and so is my crew. We swore an oath to fight the Fire Nation, at least until the war is over. We made a pact to help our people above all. And when the war is over, we haven't decided yet. We need to get a new ship for one thing. And this is when, next page, immediately, the rest of the crew find Katara, the reunion happens. And I think that the main problem with the book is that this whole, like, turnaround for Jiang happens over the course of, like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pages, basically. Like, it's only a very small part of the book that Jiang goes from just kind of acting like a typical pirate to actually, no, there's more to her than you kind of would think. And I don't think they quite leave enough time, and there was room to do more development with her, because I think the character actually had quite a bit of potential. They just didn't really, over the course of this book, do that much with her, to the point where, like, okay, that's kind of interesting. I would maybe be okay with seeing you again in this story, but you would really have to do something, like, important to make that happen. So then right at the end, so they're like, okay, Katara, what did you get up to while you were separated from us? She explains the whole story of, like, knocked out a Fire Nation soldier with waterbending, got trapped in an occupied village, but I escaped by joining a crew of pirates and stuff like that. And the whole point is that Toph says, I find this very hard to believe, which people have pointed out. Is that not a continuity error? Should Toph not be able to immediately tell that Katara is telling the truth when she's saying this? And again, I think they just about get away with it because of the wording. That you can interpret it as, like, she does believe her, she knows she's telling the truth, but still can't picture Katara doing any of this. And so it takes Jiang basically interrupting the group talking and confirming this to be the thing that kind of makes them all go, like, wait, whoa. And again, I think Aang is kind of presented a little weirdly here, of just, like, at the very start of the book, and then also here, him not really believing Katara, and then at the start of the book, him kind of being like, like, it's okay, I guess, to not be tough, and I don't know, it's just a little bit of a weird presentation for Aang. In a similar way to, like, in Balance, I wasn't particularly happy with the way the character was portrayed there either. There's just some slight, issues that isn't really that great. But, Jiang confirms it to her. They actually offer her a place on the crew, but she, of course, refuses, more or less, but says, I hope you'll consider becoming law-abiding citizens once the war is over. She just says, if you ever get tired of fighting beside the Avatar, there's a job as a pirate waiting for you. And they're all just impressed as the book ends with Sokka saying, I was just saying you're the coolest sister in the world. And she just says, yeah, I know. End of the book. And I think the book just ends in such a nothing way. Like, okay, Katara has now got direct proof to everyone else that she is tough. But the biggest problem with this is that why is there no reaction from Toph? The whole thing started because Toph was saying this stuff to Katara. So why is it, like, Sokka talking to Katara that ends the book? Why is Toph's last line in this book, I find that hard to believe, when it should be, I think, some sense of Toph giving her reaction to finding out that this is the truth? I don't even think the book ends really that properly. And it overall just really feels like throughout this whole book there is this sense of nothing here is particularly important, so we don't need to think about it as much as we perhaps usually would. And that's why there's a few moments where it feels like they're brushing up way too closely against continuity stuff, and that some vague wording, which isn't great to have in your book, is really the only way that they get away with it. Because I think if I was out to be more critical with this book, I can definitely see why you could look at this book and think that it's actually kind of riddled with a few continuity errors. I'm willing to give it the benefit of the doubt here, but I feel I'm being exceptionally kind on the book doing it that way, when I really am not the biggest fan of the opening section with the whole learned earthbending in a day, it took you weeks to learn, teach him waterbending. Aang knowing about the Fire Nation, knowing that the Fire Nation views the Air Nomads as having an army before 302, that doesn't feel great. Even the Toph not addressing her, lie detecting skills towards the end, not great. Considering that part of the reason that this book is set during ATLA is to avoid setting it in the more sort of complicated comic time period. I don't think you would have encountered many of these type of continuity errors setting it there, because for a Katara solo story set in or around like Imbalance, there's not a lot of stuff you have to really brush up against. Whereas in the middle of the show here, any topic that you cover, you're sort of, you have to judge it off like, okay, what happens later on versus what happens, going forward. And it's just a little bit of a problem. And like I said, it's just stuff like the resolution to both sides of the plot. The Fire Nation soldier, they just bring him back to have a joke. That what Sokka and Aang said to him have had no impact. That ultimately there's no takeaway from them with regards to what he says about the Air Nomads. It's just that, okay, they sort of now know that there really is no convincing people. But again, there's no takeaway. That they don't even resolve it in the sense of like, maybe after the war we can, fix this and maybe set up some sort of a thing where we maybe come back to the stuff from the headband and like changing the way the Fire Nation teaches things. And that is a topic I'd actually like to maybe cover. Like, has Zuko done anything with regards to sort of the histories and the sealed away histories from before Sozin, and fixing some of that stuff that is in the Fire Nation school system of like lying about history and so on. But again, it minorly touches on these topics but really doesn't do anything. So apart from Aang, his dedication to want to kind of prove that the Air Nomads aren't like that, you didn't really get too much from that side of the plot. And then similarly with the Katara side of the plot, because the premise is ultimately so weak in that it's just Toph says some stuff to her and then she's put into a situation where she needs to be tough. And it's not a challenge for Katara, like, really at all. We know she's tough, we know she can handle herself because she already is super, super skilled. This sort of a thing would be a little bit more interesting if this was actually Katara prior to 118. If this was Katara prior to getting her full training and she only knows the moves that she knows, then I think it would be a little bit more interesting because she might not have had the confidence in her ability to execute all of this properly. But because this is her post-training, this is one of the best waterbenders in the world, Katara, there's no challenge. She tackles everything that is thrown at her perfectly and wins the day, and is shown to be one of the most powerful benders that we've seen. And it makes everything feel very simple. That there's no real adjustment to be made for Katara because she already knows that she's tough, we already know that she's tough, so there's really nothing to prove. And in a way, it makes this whole book feel just a little bit pointless that we just had to forcibly set up this situation, have it basically be resolved, but the characters already know it's resolved. And that's the problem. You locked yourself into a situation where you were never going to touch on anything important enough in this book to justify this book being, impactful. So you had to do it in a way where it ultimately was throwaway. Because if they did anything notable enough, then surely it would have been covered in other episodes. But they couldn't. And that's the problem here with this. The book couldn't do anything more. With the Fire Nation soldier plot, they couldn't have him say anything more. They couldn't have Aang learn anything more from the Fire Nation soldier, because it would have, even more directly than the book already did, brush up against the continuity with 302 because of where they've chosen to set this book. Which again brings me back around to the idea, why is this book set here? Why isn't it set in the comic timeline where they're more free to do stuff with the characters? That way at least you could potentially do and take a new angle with Katara, because we don't know every single dynamic with Katara where she is in the comics right now. They could create just a new little dynamic for the character to, develop over the course of a book like this by setting it in the right point. But because we already know what Book 2 Katara goes through, this doesn't change anything. We know in the episodes prior to 209 that Katara can handle herself. We know in the episodes after it she can handle herself. Did this book serve any real purpose in bridging, getting Katara from where she was before to here? Not really. And honestly, unless they come back and have more stories that involve Jang as a character, and the fact that, we now know where Katara met this character, what exactly are we doing? Is Jang important enough of a character to where we really want to see books about her, when there's so much other important stuff with the main characters that we want covered? And you're just getting into this situation of like, books focusing on Jang are likely not really what we want, and are going to distract even further from the stuff that we actually do want, and that it's just spiraling out of control in terms of just stuff that we don't want happening in the comics, and getting further and further away from the topics we do want covered. But like I said, it's still fun throughout. Like, I like seeing just Katara just win in every situation here, be really, really strong and powerful. I like the minor touching on, the kind of complicated dynamic with the Fire Nation and Earth Kingdom military, and the fact that as much as the Earth Kingdom military is fighting in the war, and you have to respect them for that you can see why to the people the Earth Kingdom military are not really an organization to be fully respected. That on a wide scale, Earth Kingdom as a full nation perspective, yes, but individually the Earth Kingdom army doesn't really seem to have an influence in specific areas, and you get those kind of slightly more nuanced points. But again, I think in 2020, one-shots like this should be tackling these topics with a little bit more depth. I don't think it's good enough to just lightly brush on a few topics and be like, yep, we're done. Cover this stuff. In that, like, I feel like half of the nuance that I got out of this book is just me applying what I now know about, like, Dao Fei and pirates from the Kyoshi novels onto this book, rather than anything that this book itself did necessarily. That this book, to me, I only get really anything out of it because I know the Avatar universe quite well, so I see some of the connections that are being made, rather than the book just being that impactful. But there's sort of my full thoughts on Katara and the Pirate Silver. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on it. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.